Alright, keyboard warriors, get ready to type because I'm going to piss you off. This is why cold air intakes are useless and dangerous on the Nissan Juke, and you should run a short ram intake. Alright guys, welcome back to How to Modify Your MR16DDT, and today, as I mentioned, we are going to be talking about intakes. We're finally getting into the performance part of building your car. So, why am I dedicating a whole video to intakes? Well, there's a lot of myths around intakes, and there's a lot of mistrued information around intakes, especially on turbocharged cars. All this information I'm about to give strictly pertains to the Juke and other turbocharged cars with small turbochargers. Okay, just get that out of there. Not naturally aspirated, not big V8s, not. We're talking specifically about the engine and the title. Okay? Okay. Now, differences between a short ram and a cold air intake on the MR16DDT. InGen makes one of each. A short ram intake on this particular vehicle sits the pod filter on the side of the battery behind the gator light if you're in a Juke. It is a shorter running pipe, thus the name short ram intake. A cold air intake in regards to this vehicle runs that intake pipe down into the fender well behind the front bumper and in theory picks up colder air. Why am I so firmly against these cold air intakes? They're dangerous as hell on a car that you drive around every day. The air filter, the actual part that pulls in air, that creates suction like on a straw, sits where water constantly goes. If you ever drive through a rainstorm, I want you to, I don't know why you would, but I want you to take a flashlight and I want you to look into where that pod would fit. I want you to look where that intake filter would be. It's right behind the fog light if you have a base model. It's right behind the DRLs if you have a Nismo. It is soaking wet in there. Absolutely drenched in water in there. Now if you have your air filter, your intake all the way down there, where do you think that water's going? It's going onto the intake, it's going it's going onto the air filter, it's going through the air filter, up the intake tube, over your mass airflow sensor, into your turbo, into your engine. That's not good. Mass airflow sensors aren't supposed to get wet, okay? It's a very bad idea. I mean, to further drive home my point, you don't gain any horsepower from an intake on these cars. It's pissed off all of you. You don't gain any horsepower. You increase the efficiency of the airflow going into the turbocharger, which means that the turbo will not have to work so hard to make horsepower or to make boost. This is true. That's accomplished by smoothing out that intake track into the turbocharger. But the way a turbocharged car makes horsepower is through intake air temps controlled by the intercooler. Okay? Your intercooler is the most important part of that induction system as far as air intake temps go. The big argument is, oh, well, you're sticking your pod filter inside the engine bay with a short ram intake, so it's going to take in all this hot air, your car is not going to make as much power. Whereas if you put the cold air intake in, it's pulling in all this cold air from outside. Colder air means more power. As soon as that air comes through the intake and it hits that turbocharger, and as soon as that turbocharger starts to compress that air, that 10 to 20 degree temperature difference between outside the car where the cold air intake is and where the short ram intake is gone. You're reducing it down to maybe a 1 degree difference before it goes to the intercooler. If you're running a crap intercooler like the factory one, then your intake air temps are going to go up even more because the intercooler is not working. You run a true front mount intercooler or really any aftermarket intercooler, that will bring your intake temps lower. It's the compression of the air that increases temperature, not the air coming into the turbo. These turbos get hot. Take your car for a beat run. I dare you to just grab onto that compressor housing. It's gonna hurt like a bitch. It's hot. I'm passionate about this if you can't tell. I know of several Juke owners that have run cold air intakes, never had a problem, and one day They sucked up a ton of water, killed their mass airflow sensor, almost hydrolocked the engine, damaged their turbo. It's just not a good thing to do. It's just not. You don't want water getting pulled in. And now there's probably 50 of you that have already typed at this point that there's things like hydro shields. You put it around your filter and everything's fine. Those don't always work. That is still a material in which air has to pass through. Air carries moisture. If it's pouring out, if you're in the middle of like a hurricane, or if you're driving through deep puddles of water, and that gets soaked, you're still going to pull up water. The first thing that's going to get damaged in your car is going to be the mass airflow sensor. With your mass airflow sensor dead, your car is going to run like crap, go into limp mode, and you just killed a $300 OEM Nissan sensor. All for an extra 20-degree intake temperature difference before the turbo, which amounts to almost no change at the throttle body where it counts. Now we can go back to horsepower increases. There are none from either. Let me just get that right out of the way. I've dynoed plenty of Jukes with cold air intakes, short ram intakes, and stock intakes. The cold air and short ram intakes never gave a more than 3 horsepower increase to the Juke. Okay? And this kind of brings me to a separate but similar topic, and that is companies advertising horsepower gains. Don't take their numbers at face value. I know how the tricks are played. You do 3 baseline pulls, you take your lowest number. Then you put your intake on, you take 3 pulls, take your highest number. Holy crap, it gained 15 horsepower. It's not how that works, especially on turbocharged cars. These cars are designed without a tune to not make any more horsepower than factory. It's just what it is. So if you're looking at intakes because you want an intake, because it's a modification you can do, it's easy, it's fairly cheap, go for it. But if you're going to do it, make sure it's a short ram intake. Make sure it's a good short ram intake. I've seen a lot of people running the, I believe it's the K&N Typhoon intakes on the Juke. That's a really bad intake design. There's not enough flow straight pipe before the mass airflow sensor. I don't really trust that as far as how it's going to affect your long-term fuel trims, but I highly suggest the in-gen short ram intake. I highly suggest it. I have one on my Juke, I put it on my past Jukes, I put it on all my friends' Jukes. I highly suggest it. And I don't mean to come off as rude about this topic, but I get passionate about it because I've personally hydrolocked an engine with a cold air intake. It was a naturally aspirated car. I thought I was the coolest kid around because I had a cold air intake on it, and I couldn't get my car home one day because I got so much water sucked in it. It's just dangerous. It's dangerous. And I know there's probably people already typing in the comments, oh, well, I live in Arizona or I live in wherever that doesn't get any rain. It's perfectly safe for me. Okay, so let's not talk about water. Let's talk about road debris. Okay? So a few episodes ago I talked about that intake resonator silencer assembly you can take off your factory intake, and it prevents crap from getting up into your air filter. So same kind of deal. You have that air filter sitting down really, really low behind the front bumper, and because of where it is, you are getting debris and dust and dirt in there. And let's say something rips a hole in your filter, or let's say you didn't tighten your filter down and it falls off somehow, and you do a hard pull, you pull up some of that debris, you just blew a turbo up. I'm not saying the short ram intake is perfect, but I'm saying it is a better option if you are modifying your Juke. You do get technically cooler air than the factory intake if you're still on that. Where it's sitting on the other side of the battery, you have airflow coming in over the gator light through the awesome body line that Nissan put there, the giant gap between the hood and the gator light. There's airflow there. The battery acts as kind of a heat barrier to the main engine. You have airflow coming in through that fender well still. It's not... I'm going to go back to what I originally said. There's no performance gain between either intake on these cars. You go get a tune, like I said, a short ram intake or cold air intake is going to give you, your turbo is going to have to work less hard or not as hard to pull air into it. So yes, it makes the turbo a little more efficient. You will not make horsepower using these intakes. You simply won't. The same applies for a slew of other vehicles. You look at, your WRXs, you look at Evos. Actually, that's a good point right there. Go look at your Evos. I have never seen a fast Evo 8 or Evo 9 running an actual cold air intake. because it's not practical. The benefits do not outweigh the risks. The power that you're going to gain comes from your tune and parts that make your vehicle more efficient, as we've covered in previous episodes. So, down in the comments, let me know if you have a short rim intake or a cold air intake. Let me know how mad you are at me for saying these things that the internet will tell you is wrong. And make sure you hit that like button, the subscribe button. Stick around for the next episode where we're going to start talking about how to really make actual power out of your Juke.